Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Trent DeBruin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Mushbaugh. And today we're going to talk about what it takes to become a 403b or 401k multimillionaire. Now, to many people, the idea of saving up $2 million or more to your employer retirement accounts might seem unrealistic, but it's actually much easier than it seems if you just do the right things consistently over time. And that's what today's episode is about, explaining what those right things are and some of the wisdom behind them. And you'll see we break it down into 4 specific steps or behaviors to follow in order to put you on the right path. And what we'll discuss today is partly the numbers in terms of ages, amounts you need to save, etc., but also anecdotal evidence from our own experience working with clients who are 403b or 401k multimillionaires themselves, and some of the common behaviors we see from them. And before we dive in, we want to set the stage in terms of how to think about the process of saving to your retirement accounts. And it's a lot like the process of caring for a garden, which we both feel very unqualified using this analogy, so for those of you who enjoy gardening, you may want to correct us. But when it comes to gardening, there are certain actions you need to routinely do, like planting, watering, and pulling weeds. However, most of the time is spent simply standing back and letting things take care of themselves. Just like watering your plants every couple hours causes more harm than good, so can tinkering with your investments too frequently. So with a garden, you need to understand that things won't happen overnight, and there are steps you need to follow and certain things you need to do to properly care for your garden and get it to where you want it to be. And the same is true with saving to your employer retirement accounts. During the early years, it can feel like you're doing all the right things, but your account balance isn't growing as quickly as you would like. And if you check it every day, similar to if you checked your garden every day, you might be unhappy with the progress early on. However, over time, as you continue to focus on the right inputs, and in the case of investing, allow the power of compounding to work for you, the results will take care of themselves. So with that introduction, let's jump into the first of our 4 steps, which is to start saving as early as possible. And Andrew, why don't you talk about this one, since you have a 3-month-old son, and I know you'll be explaining to Grant the virtues of saving early as soon as he's willing to listen.
Yeah, whenever I explain this, it seems to be more effective than any lullaby I possibly could do of putting him to sleep, but I really think the message is resonating. And the idea of starting to save as early as possible is one of the best things you can do to start the process of letting compounding interest and growth work for you. And this one might sound simple, but most people don't understand just how significant it can be and the reasons why. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of compounding interest, we like to describe it by looking at an allowance and looking at 3 different options. So the first option is you could get $25 per week for a full year. The second one is you could get $15 a week and increase it by $1 per week. And the third option is you start with 1 penny of allowance, but then it doubles each week. Well, after 20 weeks, your total allowance would be as follows. In that first option of $25 a week, you'd have $500. In the second option, where you started at $15 a week and added $1 per week, you'd have $490. Or the third option of starting with just 1 penny, but the allowance doubling each week, equals $10,485. And the more time that goes on, the more and more the compounding of option 3 would grow. So while this is an extreme example and you certainly won't double your money every week, the idea of compounding interest follows the same logic that as the time horizon for growing your money gets longer, the more you let your money work for you. And in the early years, just like the early weeks of your allowance in that third option, before compounding interest has had a chance to work very long, the line on a chart may appear a bit flattish, but over time it starts to rise faster and faster. And just to illustrate this using an example outside of investing, there's a saying that Trent and I really like when it comes to the process of personal growth and improvement, in any area of life, and that's, what are you doing to get 1% better today? And it's such a simple idea, but it's powerful, because if you were truly able to get 1% better at something each day, which doesn't seem like a huge ask, over the course of only a year, you would get 3,778% better, or 37% times better, at whatever that one thing is. And this is exactly why you want to start saving as early as you can, to give yourself more years for that compound interest to work in your favor and do the heavy lifting. And when you're looking at a typical timeline for saving for retirement, somewhere around 25 to 30 years if you finish training in your early 30s, and are planning to retire somewhere around 55 or 65, there's a huge period of time for seemingly small things to compound. And one side note here, for the majority of people, you won't end up retiring on the money you save to your retirement accounts, but rather on the money that comes from your savings over time or the growth of your investments, which we find often surprises people, which is justifiably so, because I doubt everyone is having regular discussions about compound interest on Friday night date nights. And we recognize that, especially earlier in your career as a physician, it can be more difficult to focus on saving for retirement when you have other competing uses for your money. Whether that's paying back student loans, saving for a down payment, or college savings. However, if retirement, particularly early retirement or financial independence, is an important goal for you, you'll want to make sure that you're prioritizing that savings for retirement. And that's always why we recommend making saving for retirement that first priority to start the process of compounding interest as early as possible. And for all the physicians listening to this who are in the middle or later portions of their career, maybe you've been saving diligently to your 403b or 401k all along, and maybe you haven't. But there's no time like the present in terms of starting to save. And it reminds me of the proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. So if you haven't been saving enough up until this point, just start wherever you are now.
So for most of you, that probably makes a lot of sense that you should start saving as early as possible. But the next question is, what exactly should you be doing in terms of saving? And that brings us to step number 2, which is to max out your 403b or 401k each year. And when thinking about your main employer retirement accounts, whether that's a 403b or a 401k, almost all employers offer some type of matching contribution. And as a quick side note, a 403b and a 401k are essentially the same type of account. You just have a 403b if your employer is a not-for-profit and a 401k if it's for-profit. But the way the employer match works is that you contribute to the retirement plan, and your employer then matches it by contributing a certain amount on your behalf. And the way to think about that is it's basically free money. And by not taking advantage of it, you're essentially working for less than your employer is offering to pay you, since you're leaving some money on the table. Looking at it from another perspective, this is an immediate 100% or more return on your investment. You contribute $1, and it immediately doubles or triples depending on the match. And there's no other place where you'll find a guaranteed return that high. And the amount of this match varies depending on the employer. For example, Michigan Medicine offers the best match of any of the local health systems, where they have a 2-for-1 match up to 5% of your salary.
Well, that's a sore subject, at least for 2020, with that 2-for-1 match being paused for a year.
Yeah, sorry to bring it up, although based on everything we've been hearing, those matching contributions will resume again in 2021. So all of our U of M clients are looking forward to that. But to give an example of what this matching contribution looks like in practice, if you're a physician earning $250,000 and you contribute $12,500 to your 403b, which is 5% of your salary, the university will contribute another $25,000 or 10% of your salary. And while the match at U of M is particularly good, Henry Ford, Beaumont, IHA, St. Joe's, and the other health systems also offer their own type of match. So when thinking about contributing to your 403b or 401k, at the absolute bare minimum, you want to contribute enough to take full advantage of your employer's match. But we always recommend that physicians not only contribute enough to receive the full employer match, but make the maximum allowable contribution to their 403b or 401k each year. These contribution limits tend to increase over time, but for 2020, the maximum contribution is $19,500 for people under the age of 50 and $26,000 for people who are 50 or older, since the government allows you to make additional catch-up contributions as you get closer to retirement. And the idea of making the maximum contribution may or may not seem like a lot, which during training it would be, which is why it's not as necessary that all residents or fellows maximize their retirement accounts. But as an attending, even as a younger one with student loans, you should be able to make these contributions. And while maximizing your 403b or 401k is great, if you have a goal of early financial independence or you want to reach that multimillionaire account balance earlier, you'll need to save even more than just contributing to your 403b or 401k. What's great for those physicians who are able to max out their 403b contributions and still save even more for retirement is that many of the local health systems like Michigan Medicine and Henry Ford offer additional tax-advantaged retirement saving space, such as saving to a 457b. So know that if you're able to do even more beyond maxing out your 403b or 401k, that's only going to further accelerate your progress. And one other point when it comes to saving for your employer retirement account is to make sure you always automate your saving by paying yourself first. And luckily, this is easy to do with these accounts since you can set up an automatic withdrawal from each paycheck, so the money goes into your account before you even have the chance to see it or spend it. And this is important because it removes willpower from the saving process, and willpower is never a good solution for accomplishing anything, so it helps you avoid lifestyle creep and spending some of the money instead of saving it. So once you're making that maximum contribution to your 403b or 401k, you still have to decide how to invest the money once it's in the account. So Andrew, what are some things to consider there?
Yeah, most people intuitively understand they need to start saving earlier and make sure they are saving enough. But where things often get muddy and a lot of overthinking happens is deciding how to invest the money that you are saving or contributing to your retirement accounts. And as we mentioned earlier, the real growth with compounding happens with earning money on your money, which you do through investing. And we had a prior episode on some of the key principles of investing that you'll want to check out if you haven't already. So we won't go too far into the details here, but at a very high level, there are two basic types of investments. You have stocks and bonds. Stocks represent partial ownership in companies, where you get to take advantage of the growth in companies, and you often get paid out dividends from profits each quarter. While bonds represent money that you are lending, either to companies or some type of government or government entity, in return for a payment each month or quarter, similar to how you would pay interest to the bank on a mortgage. And historically, stocks have had higher returns than bonds at approximately 10% per year, compared to approximately 5% per year for bonds. And the reasons for stocks having historically higher returns is because there is more uncertainty in the near term, with the prices moving around a lot more, which is called volatility. Whereas bonds don't fluctuate nearly as much, which is why they historically have lower returns. And while everyone would love to have the higher returns of stocks with the volatility or price movement of bonds, that's a lot like asking for dessert without the calories. You can't have one without the other. So on average, 10% for stocks and 5% for bonds has been the historical trend, but we always want to point out that there's no guarantee that future returns will be similar to historical returns. Now, having said that, you would generally expect that over longer periods of times, you'll earn higher returns by investing in stocks than in bonds. And so the most common questions we hear are, is this the right time to invest? Or what fund should I choose? Which are fair questions to ask, but we believe in following a methodical approach and getting the big things right first before addressing some of those types of questions. And so step one is to figure out the right mix of stocks and bonds for you. And that's going to be the biggest driver of your returns. And this right mix is going to be different for everyone, depending on your unique situation, goals, and comfort level. But there are typically three different factors that go into figuring out the right investment mix for you. The first one is understanding your time horizon until you need the money. Typically, the further away you are from retirement and actually needing the money to fund your lifestyle, the more you can afford to invest in stocks because you have more time to ride out the ups and downs of the stock market. And in return, you'll be able to capture the higher returns from stocks. And this is the idea behind target date investment funds, which are becoming more and more popular offerings in 401ks or 403bs. And with the target date fund, when you were younger, there will be a higher percentage in stocks. That percentage will gradually decline over time as you get closer to retirement. And this is a great approach in general, but we prefer to be more intentional with the right allocation of stocks and bonds based on your unique situation versus a more cookie cutter autopilot allocation change. And the second factor is based on your needs or goals. If you had a delayed start to saving, or if you live a more expensive lifestyle, then you often need to either save more or have your investments earn a higher return to make up for either lost time or to fund a bigger lifestyle. Now, on the flip side, if you started saving earlier in life and you live a more modest lifestyle, you may not need as high of a return to meet your goals. So you have more flexibility with not needing as high of a return from your investments to meet those goals. And this tends to lead to the third point, which is tying everything together, which is your investment temperament or comfort level with investment. And certain people are completely comfortable watching their investment portfolios during periods like 2008 or 2009, or even the spring of this year, knowing that the stock market will eventually recover, while other people get really stressed out seeing all these fluctuations and just feel more comfortable giving up some of the higher returns from stocks to have a smoother ride over time. And to be clear, we're not actually giving individual investment advice here on the show, but we want to at least conceptually talk through the decision-making process and the factors that go into figuring out what that right mix is for you. And so while the exact mix is going to be different for everyone, stocks have a higher expected return. So by having a higher allocation towards stocks, you can reasonably expect that your 401k or 403b balance will grow faster over time and help you to reach your goals faster or reach that multimillionaire 403b and 401k status. And while this episode is meant to show you how you can reach a multi-million-dollar account balance in your retirement accounts, we always like to add the caveat that money is just a means to an end and everyone is unique with a different view of what enough is.
So up to this point, we've covered steps 1 through 3. Start early, make the maximum contribution, and think about the right investment mix of stocks versus bonds for you. And that brings us to our last point, which is to avoid tinkering with things over time. And said differently, this is making sure you get out of your own way and avoid doing anything to derail yourself.
Yeah, it's a lot like watching the Lions game. You think maybe it'll be different this time, but they always find a different way to screw up things and make a different mistake. So I've finally learned that it's just best to not even turn on the game in the first place.
Exactly. And when it comes to managing your 403b or 401k, there are a number of different pitfalls you want to avoid, but we'll discuss a few of the biggest ones. And the first is to avoid trying to time the market. And it's important to understand that despite what the financial media or other people might lead you to believe, almost nobody can consistently predict the future or time the market, and trying to do so is only going to get you in trouble. And as we discussed in our episode in investing, there's an emotional element to investing, and it tends to feel good when the market's going up and feel bad when the market's going down. And that can lead to the temptation to sell when the market's going down or want to wait until things settle down or the dust settles. However, with investing, the right thing to do is typically the thing that feels the worst at the time. So it's best to just ride out the ups and downs of the market and stay disciplined with your approach. Another thing to avoid is changing your investments frequently. It can be tempting to try and change your investments over time based on what's done well and what hasn't done well, but that performance chasing tends to be counterproductive and often results in you buying high and selling low, which is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. So instead, it's better to come up with your investment approach on the front end, whether that's choosing your stock bond allocation or investing in a target date fund, and then only making changes over time as your situation dictates it. Specifically, adjusting your mix of stocks and bonds as you move closer to retirement and needing to use the money, or if you've already won the game and you can afford to take some risk off the table to help you sleep better at night. And lastly, another huge thing to avoid is taking money from your account early, whether that's through a loan or an early withdrawal. The money in your 403b or 401k is earmarked for retirement and should be treated as such, and you shouldn't need to access it ahead of time. In addition to having the right perspective here, there are also the financial reasons why you shouldn't touch it early. For example, if you take out money prior to age 59 and a half, you'll not only have to pay taxes on the money in the year you withdraw it, but you'll also pay a 10% penalty. And if you take out a loan, you not only have to pay interest on that loan, but you then have a hole in your retirement savings that you need to fill. And things like this can undo years of hard work spent saving and investing to your account. So you want to make sure you avoid them.
Yeah, so now that we've talked through the 4 steps, we'll wrap things up by providing some context for what this actually looks like in practice using a hypothetical example. So let's say that we have a physician who does a 4-year residency program and then starts their attending position when they're around 30 years old. Their salary is $250,000. They make the maximum contributions to their 403b each year, and their employer makes an annual matching contribution equal to 5% of their salary. And then we'll assume they invest in a mix of stocks and bonds, but have a higher weight toward stocks and end up earning an average investment return of 7% per year. Now, it's worth noting that this is an overly simplified example, and you'll never earn the exact same investment return year in and year out because returns are random and volatile over time. And some years you might be up and other years you might be down. There's also no guarantee that anyone will earn an average of 7% return on their investments in the future, but this is just for illustrative purposes to provide some context and show you the power of compounding. So in this example, if this physician did what we mentioned and things played out exactly as we outlined them in terms of the investment returns, by the time the physician reached age 60, their 403b would be approximately $3.5 million. And it's interesting to look at that projected account value by age because this really highlights the power of compounding. At age 45, so 15 years after starting, the portfolio is worth about $1 million. At age 50, only 5 years later, it's worth about $1.5 million. At age 55, it's worth $2.4 million. And then at age 60, as we mentioned, it's worth around $3.5 million. So you can see just how quickly it grows in those later years. And going back to the first of the 4 steps in the process, which is starting as early as possible, it shows why that's so incredibly important. And having worked with clients that are already in retirement and also younger physicians earlier in their careers, it's always an interesting dynamic to see because we'll hear younger physicians say, do you really think my portfolio will get to XYZ amount at age 60? And at the same time, we have retired physicians with several $1 million, and they are still surprised at how all those years of being smart and saving well paid off. And so we always like to preach the idea of focusing on the things you can control and planning around the things you cannot. And in the case of saving and investing, by taking advantage of the things we discussed today, you'll put yourself in a great position down the road, whenever retirement is.
Well, that covers everything we wanted to discuss, and hopefully you now have a good understanding of what it takes to become a 403b or a 401k multimillionaire and the reasons behind some of those key principles. And if you've been doing all these things for years and are either there or well on your way, congratulations. And if you're just starting out or getting going, or if you're later in your career and maybe haven't been able to prioritize retirement savings as much as you would have liked up until now, hopefully the discussion provided some useful perspective as well as some inspiration. And just to summarize the 4 steps we discussed: 1, start saving as early as possible. 2, make sure you max out your 403b or 401k each year. 3, figure out the right mix of stocks and bonds in your portfolio based on your unique situation and goals, while understanding that stocks have higher expected returns, but also higher risk in terms of greater price volatility year to year. And 4, avoid tinkering with your accounts over time, whether that's taking loans or withdrawals or frequently changing around your investments. Well, thank you to everyone for joining us for another episode of the show. You can check out the show notes by visiting the podcast page of our website at mdwmllc.com/podcast. We also have a downloadable resource on that page called the Toolkit for Optimizing Your Finances as an Employed Physician. And it's a comprehensive guide to managing your finances as an employee of a health system or a private practice. And one of the things it covers is employer retirement plans and the opportunities there. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. And take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.